Hey folks, Zach here. I wanted to do a series of videos on different website topics, so I was taking a look at the list on Quora here to find a good question that I might be able to answer for this video. I found this one. This is just what's in my Quora today, and here's the question. Is it possible to become a freelance web developer if I suck at web design but with good knowledge in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a backend programming language? The short answer would be yes. Is it possible to be a freelance web developer? Sure. Um, I think web developer and web designer are two different jobs. They're two very different disciplines. Well, maybe not that different because there's a lot of crossover, but they are definitely their own discipline. So I wouldn't brand yourself as a web designer unless you are comfortable on the design side. So really, what's the difference between the two? A web designer is the look and feel. They're the front end guys. They're the user experience guys. They're the ones who would look at a site and say, we want to sell a product on this site, so let's make sure we have that product front and center. Let's figure out who our customers are and how we can minimize the number of clicks they have to do to get the information that they want. And the answer to those questions just varies totally depending on the target market. The back-end guys are more the ones worrying about the infrastructure. They're kind of like the iceberg, everything that 90% below the water. So they're not only concerned about server-side scripting, but more in their domain is all that infrastructure. Like if you're working in AWS or Amazon, the terraforming and all of the different services that Amazon offers that you'd have to stitch together to build web apps. So websites, I think, are less complicated, and they're certainly more vetted. There's technology stacks that are often used that you don't have to be a real good back-end developer. Like if you are comfortable working with WordPress, then you can just rely on WordPress as your back end and then just focus on the front end. So this guy's saying, is it possibly freelance web development? It's kind of funny the way he poses this question, because he says he sucks at web design, but good at HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a back-end programming language. That and a back-end programming language, to me, is like, whatever that is, would probably be at the top of your resume if you were actually good at that. It's not necessary you know a ton of back-end languages, but you should have some idea of what the boundaries are around back-end, like what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. And typically, that's the thing that's the most marketable on this list. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everybody who codes at least has some knowledge of that. So the advice I would give this guy would be, if you're not a designer, then what you should do is partner with one. A lot of times I see these relationships working where a developer and a designer kind of go in together to form their own company, and the designer meets with the client, discusses all of their branding information, and branding would include the fonts and colors and core messaging and things like that, and they would come up with a design, and that design for the website would be compatible with the same thing that the company's already doing for, say, their business cards or their brochures or things like that. It's one uniform kind of design. You don't want different fonts on different mediums. It's all the same kind of impact. So the web designer would have those sorts of conversations with the clients, and where they would pass the baton to the web coder is typically in the form of something like a Photoshop file. So the web designer says, let's make it look exactly like this, and the customer signs off on it, and then that Photoshop file would come to the web developer, and it would be that guy's job to actually make it real. So if you can't do that first part yourself, find somebody who can, and just give each other discounts is typically how I've seen those relationships work. And if you have a UI guy, I mean, he's probably going to be more on the web design side, not the web coding side. Honestly, UI guys I only have seen in the corporate world, like someone exclusively focused to UI. Usually that role gets kind of bundled into the web design when you're dealing with small business websites, because it's a whole other role, and there's enough crossover that you can cover the majority of what needs to be done. So if all you're good at though is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you don't want a partner, or you're just looking for work and you want to get started right away, you can. There's jobs out there. What you're going to want to look for is simple web pages, like one-pagers. But more, I think, actually, I got an email the other day. This is a good segue. So jobs like this, I get this list of jobs sent to me from Creative Circle about website work, and I can just respond to the ones that are appropriate. Creative Circle is just a contracting company. It's one of 1,000 others. I mean, but you want to sign up for contracting companies like this so you can see what works out there that you might want to apply to. So they recently, 2 days ago, sent me this link for an email designer, and they're looking for someone who can edit, slice, PSD, creative files. So that says a web coder. HTML code for email, same thing. Non-responsive format, which is redundant. If you know responsive, then you're probably overqualified for this. Design in an email-friendly scale. Someone who can handle formatting of both images and live HTML text. So this job is perfect for somebody who is strong in HTML and CSS. You don't even need JavaScript. And all you would be doing all day long with a job like this is getting Photoshop files, pulling all the images out, saving them down, then stitching it back together in HTML, CSS. To give a little context on the amount of pay for a job like this, I mean, it varies because an email blast can be a mile long versus a paragraph, but just to give you some perspective, of the ones that I've done, I typically charge between like $150 to $200 per email blast. It takes a couple hours, and there's always some nitpicky stuff back and forth and working with the email client itself. If you're going with constant contact is what I mean. So I would say about $200, but you can make a living off of it if you can find enough jobs like this. Odds are you'd start with something like this, and then you'd move on to progressively harder work building one-page websites for mom-and-pop places down the place. The hardest part about all this is just finding the work. So I would recommend linking up with a designer, connecting to some consulting companies, and starting off with some email blasts to this person. Yep. Thank you.